Dan Hodge, and I am the co-founding artistic director of the Philadelphia Artists Collective. And today it is my distinct pleasure to sit down with the co-founding artistic director of the Philadelphia Artists Collective, one Damon Bonetti, a dear friend. No, my brother. I will go so far. How you doing, D?
My brother Texas.
So today we're going to talk about the last play that the PAC did in our former residence Broad Street Ministry, which was, of course, John Webster's The White Devil. D, do you want to give us just like a little snapshot of what The White Devil is about?
Sure. The White Devil by Webster. It's a Jacobean play. It's a tragedy, but it's terrible. In terms of the Jacobeans had a sensibility that, especially like in 2017 when we did this in the midst of a new presidency and things that were happening in the world, a sense of there's a real sense of corruption in the Jacobean world, and there was a real sense. There's also a modernness to Jacobean text, whereas like Shakespeare is wonderful, of course it is, and there's the poetry and there's a language in Shakespeare, and Webster has that as well, and is probably closest to his contemporaries in terms of the way he used language, but he's also very economical in the way he uses language. And the characters there aren't good guys, there aren't good people in Webster's plays. Sometimes there aren't some bad people, but the good people are flawed and the bad people are really flawed. And it creates this really, really kind of wonderful modern world. And I guess when I was looking at the play and how we were going to do it and where to set it, it just screamed film noir, and I'm a big film buff. So the idea of setting something in the world of Double Indemnity, Kiss Me Deadly, and that kind of world where it's a shadow world, where there's a lot of dark, there's a lot of shadow, and not a lot of light. And just like in the film noirs where you don't know who to trust, and even those that you think you trust turn out to be backstabbers anyway. There's just this great. It's a thriller. It really is a thriller. I mean, they called it a tragedy back then because it was based on a true story about what happened to this family. But again, you're writing for entertainment, and that's what they were doing as well. And so it's a really entertaining thriller.
It's something you've already touched upon, like a couple of things that I was gonna query you about, like the notion of why did you pick that play at that particular time, and you've addressed that. Is there anything that you want to kind of expand on that? Like,
yeah, I guess one of the things to think about is that we had the good fortune to be in residence at Broad Street Ministry for 7 years, from 2010 to 2017. And it was a wonderful residency. There are wonderful people there. The mission there is incredible. And because of the mission and because the expansion of the mission was the reason why this was our last year there. They needed the space. Unfortunately, what happens with a lot of churches in town, the congregations dwindle. And so all of a sudden space becomes available and they use it for office space, or rehearsal space, or storage space. This is the one church where the congregation kept growing and the mission kept expanding. I know. And so they needed the space. So we wanted to finish out our season, and Dan was directing, you were directing All's Well.
Yeah.
Then, I thought this is going to be our last show in the space. Our very first show in the space back in the fall of 2010 was Webster's The Duchess of Malfi. And I was thinking about this. The previous year, we did The Captive and He Who Gets Slapped. Yes. And you directed Captive, I did He Who Gets Slapped. And we both directed the shows. But in terms of you or me or Charlotte or anybody who's one of the PAC members being in the shows, that didn't happen that year.
Yeah.
So we wanted to make sure that for our last year in the space has been our residency, we kind of went back to our roots a little bit and featured you, featured me, featured Charlotte in shows. So for All's Well, you were directing, and you cast me as Paroles,
Yeah.
which was great and a great role and so much fun to do. So I knew that I was going to direct the spring show, and I wanted to find something for you and Charlotte. So
And she's a perfect Vittoria. I mean,
right, and you're a tremendous flamenco.
loud,
So
trashy nonsense.
right, and it's great because people have just seen in the intro some of the pictures from the show, and it captures it. You looking back on the pictures after a few years, it really captures this world of film noir in that space. But that was one of the reasons. That was one of the reasons why we did this, because we wanted to finish out our residency at Broad Street Ministry with the kind of work that first got us noticed and got us started
Yeah.
in Philly.
And not to mention the Webster bookend, you know.
Webster bookend. Yeah. We're not doing the Devil's Law case. Come on.
Well, so something else that you kind of broached a little bit that I'm curious about, like you're obviously a film buff, and that's always something that kind of factors into the way that you kind of think about things. You have a very cinematic mind when you're directing plays, which I think is a really great way in for some of these. And you've talked about the film noir world, but I also want to balance this against, I think the first show you directed for the PAC, which was Changes of Heart, which was also kind of like a golden age of Hollywood comedy. And the funny thing is they lived in, we'll say, adjacent worlds, because they're both kind of 30s, 40s. I guess film noir kind of tips into the 50s a little bit. But can you talk about like how those two projects kind of balance against each other in terms of what your personal aesthetic is and the kind of films that really light you up?
Yeah, it's fun. Like I had directed before, but it wasn't until actually being in a show. I was in a production of Taming of the Shrew at Philadelphia Shakespeare Festival.
I saw it.
And yeah, and Dominic Scudera was the director. And Dominic was the first, and Dominic's great. And Dominic was the first director who I'd ever worked with who really captured this is the style that we're doing. We're doing this style. And here are examples. And he showed clips of different movies of like, this is what we're not doing of Taming of the Shrew. This is what we're not doing. And then talked about this world of screwball comedy and that kind of romance for Taming of the Shrew, and capturing that kind of aesthetic from soup to nuts, from the very beginning to the very end. That concept was intact, and I just thought that was great because I've seen concepts before, but usually like they would start off strong and then it usually goes away because then the play takes over, and then maybe it worked for the beginning, but it didn't really find its way through, and then we got to do the play. And the concept doesn't really work here, but we're in the same kind of costumes, but we're kind of get rid of the style because we got to get through to the end, and then the end always goes away. Yeah, I usually find that people set up what seems to be the bookend, mm-hmm. and then at the end they don't honor it. There isn't a sense of where the world ends.
Sure.
So I think in terms of aesthetic, I always want to try as a director to really kind of base the plays that I'm directing in a specific world.
Yes, a unified world.
What's that? I'm sorry.
A unified world.
A unified world. Like I have trouble with we're going to set this sort of modern. We're going to set this sort of in the past. Right. And that's not only as a director, but also as an actor. Like I like as an actor to know, okay, what is this world supposed to be? What are a good way to think of it is, what are the rules of this world, mm-hmm. so that we know the rules so we can break them.
Yeah.
Because if you don't have any kind of establishment, then like, I don't know, then it becomes chaos, which, could be interesting at times, especially if it's, I don't know, if you use it a certain way. But for myself, I like to, and for my actors, I always like to make sure that like, this is the world that we're in. And here are examples. So for White Devil, I said, this is the world we're going to live in. And Catherine Fritz was our costume designer, and she really captured that world of the costumes and what that is. And then I gave you all homework. So I was like, watch Double Indemnity, watch Kiss Me Deadly, especially because like, those are the characters. Watch something, even like going to like something like Casablanca, which isn't really a film noir, but it has like that kind of that kind of intrigue and backstabbing.
Right.
Um, I mean, there are modern film noirs as well that, like Miller's Crossing and things you can you could watch as well. A sense of shifting loyalties. And oh my gosh, throughout this play, thinking about your character as Flaminio, nothing but constant shifting loyalties throughout this thing.
Well, he's only loyal to himself, which is a really
Right.
kind of film noir notion
Hmm.
that everybody's looking out for themselves. Now, I'm curious, film noir being what it is, and you've created this world that is, or you built this world that was very specific, and everybody was locked into the style. But something that did kind of exist outside of what we typically think of as the noir aspect is you really leaned into a production that, when everything was said and done, was very bloody. So
Yeah.
tell me about that. Like, how do you take your personal conception of film noir and then attach it to something that really wants that kind of almost gratuitous bloody violence? Like, how did that work for you?
I mean, it's there. I mean, it's there in the movies from the 40s and 50s. It's just they didn't show the blood,
Right.
because of code. But like I keep going back to Kiss Me Deadly, but Kiss Me Deadly is completely brutal. There's a torture scene that happens that we just hear the screams, which is very Webster. There's a guy's mistaken and gets stabbed in the back. Another guy's punched and is thrown down a pile of steps. Um, you know, the, there's a number of things that happen in that film that they couldn't do back then. But then as film noir progressed, you think about Chinatown,
Yeah.
and you get the nose,
Yeah.
and that's Jacobean. That's absolutely Jacobean right there.
We slipped my nose in the end of the play.
Right. Yeah, that's where they got it from.
Yeah.
Probably, yeah, that's right. I totally forgot about that. What's funny is that I never saw Chinatown until this summer.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So yeah, like so I'd always heard about that, but I'd never seen that actual scene. But yeah, I mean the blood is there. The blood, and I'm sure probably during that time they used the sheep guts and all that kind of stuff, and like the bladders full of the blood and stuff, and things are a mess.
Right.
But I think we talked about it at this time that Webster and these especially these later Jacobeans were the Tarantinos of their time in
Hmm.
terms of like or could we say the Peckinpahs of their time
Wow.
as well?
Yeah.
In the sense of you could say that the Wild Bunch is gratuitous in terms of its blood, but there's something operatic about
Yeah.
it at the same time, and I think that's kind of what they were. That's kind of what they were going for.
That's excellent. That's really, really, yeah. And it feeds into it. I mean, I did carry a kind of curiosity at the time because so much of what happens in noir, I think, almost relies on what is unseen. The torture happening off stage and the screaming, and that has a very kind of Webster thing. But leaning into the full tilt boogie of it, like, you get a guy stabbed in the back, thrown down a flight of stairs in Kiss Me Deadly, but you never actually see, the chocolate syrup that, a black and
Sure.
white picture would have used. So I'm really interested to the decision to go full bore into having the stage literally sticky with blood when we were done, as opposed to, you know, casting the deep shadows and letting that be what does the work for you. So it's interesting.
Yeah, like I think, and even then, there was only so much we could do
Mm.
because we could have, at the end, what it's about. And there's a picture. Maybe I should put it in. There's like now you're talking about all the blood, and I've already created like the. Anyway, now I got to put in the blood. Some more pictures, but you and Charlotte ended up pretty bloody, but there's a thing that happens where Lexi Braverman's character and David Pica's character, are turned on by the violence and they kiss. And then all of a sudden the good guys come in and Pica puts her as a shield. And so Adam Altman comes in and shoots her in the back
Yeah.
instead of hitting him, and she drops. And that's an example of where, we could have maybe somehow rigged a blood packet or something like that to explode or something like. But at that point, there's only so much blood you could afford, but the small theater company.
And Fritzy would have killed us for getting that costume bloody.
Exactly. Yeah. We saved all our blood up for Tis Pity and the end of Tis Pity.
Right. So you kind of touched on her as well. Like I was curious about Lexi Braverman, how you took a role that was, of course, we do this all the time in these classical plays, but a role that was originally written for a man and created this kind of distinctly femme fatale track. And I wondered, like, where did where did that flashpoint come for you? Why that character as opposed to some of the others? Like, we do a lot of bending when it comes to casting, and I'm curious about how you landed on the pieces that you landed on for that particular production, because there's also a lot of doubling.
Yeah, a lot of doubling. For that track, uh, Lodovico, Pika's character, is kind of a firebrand who's been released from prison, and he has two henchmen in the script, Antonello and I forget the other guy.
Yeah.
But he's always got two henchmen with him, and I just thought in this world, and especially because we also wanted to create another track for a woman. Um, you know, actually, sort of the inspiration for, like, I knew I wanted to do it, and then the inspiration was sort of Gun Crazy. Gun
Yeah.
Crazy is a movie from 1950, 51 with John Dahl and oh god, I forget her name. But it's wonderful because it takes sort of uh, the femme fatale, but makes the femme fatale super into violence.
Mhm.
So much so that the guy the lead guy is actually averse to it, and she craves it and gets off on the killing, which for that time was pretty unique.
Yeah,
You know,
transgressive.
yeah, I mean, there's all kinds of like modern examples. Like the one I just went to was Natural Born Killers and stuff like that.
Mhm.
You know, and we see like so many examples of that now. But for 1940, whatever that was, or 51 or whatever Gun Crazy came out, that was really kind of unique. And I thought I really loved the idea of, and I think I told Lexi to watch that movie, and I said, this is kind of where Antonella lives. And so she's somebody who really is into the violence of the world, and she gets off on that. And it's a thing of this world where, and it's very much in the Jacobean world as well, where violence and sexuality are entwined. You
Mhm.
know, they're really, it's the world. You think about violence, sexuality, and power,
Right.
and you know, and that's, I mean, that's modern world kind of stuff, and that was this world back in 1619 or whenever this was written, 1613, I think.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And I would be, of course, remiss if I didn't ask you about Stefan.
Oh, sure. Yeah. So Stefan was our live cellist for the show, and you know, yeah, I knew that I wanted to have live music for the show, and I was thinking about like what it should be. And when we did Duchess of Malfi, we had a cellist and a percussionist, and it really kind of captured the mood of this world that you created at that time. And I thought that's film noir, and you know, and you think film noir, and you sort of think saxophone or piano, but I don't know any saxophone players and we don't have a piano. But Stefan Arne Orenson, he's a sound designer and he's resident designer at Rutgers Camden where I teach, and so he and I had worked together on a number of shows before, but he never worked with PAC before, and so I asked him, I was like, what if would you be interested in playing cello live for the show and underscoring, you know, a lot of the show. So, and that's what he did. Everything was created live. Um, you know, I'm thinking about one moment in particular, Dan, where talking about the violence in the play and kind of translating that to modern sensibility as far as like Tarantino and that kind of stuff. Some of the violence in Tarantino makes you gasp and laugh.
Yeah.
That's part of the thing in it. And there's moments in Jacobean tragedy that's very much like that. I remember I'm tangenting off myself here,
Oh,
but I
please.
remember a preview. You know, there's a moment where where your character comes in and it's like, ah, we all have to die. You know, here, let's all kill each other, and you hand the guns to the ladies, and
Yeah.
it's like, all right, you shoot me first, and then you shoot yourselves. And so it's like, all right, go, and they shoot you, and I was like, all right, and now turn the gun on yourselves, And they're like, no, we're not. You're a fool. And they hit you with the Bible, and all this stuff happens. And then it turns out that you rise from the dead, and you're like, I knew. And it turns out the guns were blanks.
It's one of my favorite moments I've ever played in any play. Like that, Damon, the gift of that moment.
And it's great because like on preview audit, our very first preview, um, there was somebody in the front row who, when you did that, was like, Jesus, and not like in a, but in a, oh, what is going on in this world? And it was great. It was really a lot of fun. But in terms of like, that's horrible and funny, and it's the same thing with there's Webster wrote these what they called the dumb shows, which are these shows that were done to kind of forward the story and had music behind it, and were all pantomimed, and all this stuff happens. So it's like where we watch two principal characters get killed, but he wrote them very comically. So so when we staged it, and I had an idea how this would go. And then going back to Stefan, when we stage it, I would always do the music. So like I was like, so when I told Stefan, it's like it's kind of like this. When I showed him what we were doing, and he's like, just sing what you want. And so I was like, okay. And he's got his recorder out, and I do the whole thing, and he created everything that I sung.
Yeah.
And so I improved upon it, of course, because he just heard me sing. So, and of course, he's a brilliant classical musician, and just really created a wonderful, wonderful, spooky world with that cello. And in that space, for anyone who has ever been in Broad Street Ministry and where we used to perform, the space was captured. First of all, for voice, it was really good.
Wonderful.
It was really, some spaces, some found spaces are kind of hard. Like, thinking about Seaport Museum, we always had to think about, for the Hamlet that we ended up doing, and also for Sea Voyage, we always had to make sure that we were, sharp and loud and articulate. And you have to do that at Broad Street Ministry as well. But the warmth of the space really captured voice as well, and really captured music and really captured the cello.
Yeah, that's, and so you also did, you're anticipating everywhere I want to go. You're meeting me around the computer, Damon. It's almost like we've known each other for 12 years or something.
Right.
So you hinted about that final moment of rising from the dead, and the audience member going, Jesus, like in a church, which is lovely. Do you have any particular like favorite moments from the show, or like instances that happened in rehearsal that like just like some little tidbit stories that you can give some insight to, or that the folks listening to us or watching us right now might not know, the day that like Brian McCann showed up and kicked Adam Altman in the face, which did not happen, but like
let me see, trying to think of like any moments in particular. I mean, let me think about some like favorite moments. Like some of my favorite moments were I love the kind of stealing from you from Duchess, where Duchess began with a pantomime, and kind of set the scene, and I stole that from you and created like our own version of that, where you got a real sense of like who these people were in just 30 seconds, and then created the world, and then blacked out, and then went into film noir fenestrations in terms of like slotted windows and light coming through, and all of a sudden we see Pika and Lexi just isolated in those shadows. Like that was a really lovely moment. And I really dug. Everyone just did great work in this. It was a great cast, and it was great to see some people play against type. John Lopes is a stand-up dude, and in real, I mean, he plays George Washington, but for this, he really played, what they term in terms of film noir, the heavy in this, and was really wonderful in a part that I'd never seen him do before. I'm really kind of latched on that kind of vengeance in return for what ends up happening, like his sister's death.
Mhm.
The courtroom scene was fun. Trying to stage the courtroom scene, and it's the courtroom scenes are always great, and it's how things shift and allegiances shift, and
The
how Victoria, played by Charlotte. What's that?
Yeah, the redoubtable Jared Reed as well.
Yeah, and Jared was fantastic. Everyone was really, really great in the show, and it was a pleasure to direct. Um, it's a thing. If you got good folks, you put on a good show. Um, Trying to think. I mean, that last sequence we just talked about in terms like how everything comes to an end
Yeah.
is great. Oh, and also there's like a lovely moment where these Jacobean plays, just like a lot of Shakespeare's tragedies, have the ghost, and
Yes.
there was a really lovely moment, unseen by John's character, of Mary Lee Benark, who comes back as a ghost,
Yeah.
and he can't see her, but but he just feels her presence, and then it's a moment of conscience, because like I think a ghost is a moment of conscience in these plays, and it's a turning point for his character, because it's a moment of he could embrace forgiveness and let it go, or he can put the pedal to the metal for revenge, and it's a moment where he turns away from goodness
Yeah.
in a very, very palpable way, and you know then it's like it's going to be all blood from here on in, folks.
Fantastic. Fantastic. Any parting thoughts about the show, about Broad Street Ministry, about Webster himself, about that just terrible woman that you married and searching for projects for her? Like anything you want to leave us on?
I guess it's not really leaving us on something, but it's almost kind of like setting up for the beginning,
Yes.
because even though this is the end of our residency at Broad Street Ministry back in the spring of 2017 with the PACtrospective, this is the beginning of talking about the shows that we did in residency there. So I'm looking forward, because I'm going to see you, in a while, because we're going to talk about some of the shows, as we're getting into our early years, the shows that sort of became the ones that people remember because they were the first things that they saw of us,
They
and
set
sort of,
our aesthetic.
yeah, and sort of put us on the map of like, okay, this is PAC, and this is what PAC does, and we're going to get to Mary Stewart in a little while, which was in that space.
Yeah.
So, and planning about that. So yeah, I'm looking forward to this, not being to talk about, well, this was the end of our residency there, but the beginning of the PACtrospective, of talking about our formative years.
Yeah. The marvelous time we had there.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
since we're going to be putting this up and we're actually coming up on the season,
yeah.
something that I wanted to do, Broad Street Ministry is a really incredible organization. They have a free meal to the public, I think almost every day of the week. They have a clothing closet where they provide clothing for people who may or may not have those kind of resources, and they do all that for free. So if you find yourself looking to give to a charitable organization over the holiday season, you couldn't do better than Broad Street Ministry, and not just financially, but anytime that I have cast off clothes that I want to donate, anything that I've taken care of and I just don't wear anymore, rather than taking it to a resale shop that's going to sell it to people, uh, take it over to Broad Street Ministry, because they're going to put it on somebody's back for free. Um, every year, I would go and just buy a couple dozen pairs of clean socks to drop off. They always need that sort of thing. So that's my plug for Broad Street Ministry. Pete, shall I kick it over to you to wrap it up, since you're the spearhead of the PACtrospective experience?
Sure. Well, that's great leading out of that, Dan, because I'll put at the end of this, for everyone, there's going to be a slide at the end that has information about Broad Street Ministry, so you can copy down the information from that. But yeah, the next show that we'll be talking about is All's Well That Ends Well, at some point, like in the next couple of weeks. So look for that. But thanks for joining us for the PACtrospective, brother Dan. I love you, buddy. Always good seeing you. And if hopefully we'll have a PACtrospective before the holidays really kick in. But if not, this is an opportunity to say wishing everybody well over the holidays.
Absolutely. Stay healthy, stay safe.